With a discussion about HDR in Elden Ring and HDR in general. This video is being recorded at max settings in 1440p. And most of it is from gameplay footage that I recorded as part of my Elden Ring Let's Play. Check it out, link in the description or at the end of this video. But anyway, looking at the settings, and I do want to talk about the settings just a bit here when we're thinking about HDR. So this is on max settings. The video footage you're seeing, all of it was recorded on max settings with depth of field disabled and motion blurred disabled. Resolution 1440p. With HDR enabled, and also one thing I do personally use is a game filter. Now you can't see the UI here, but I'll just turn it off for a second. This is game filter off. This is game filter on. It's a lot clearer, sharper, better. I feel than having it off. It's just a filter that NVIDIA has as part of NVIDIA. Sure, so if you want an image that's clean and crisp, that's your option. I think AMD has something similar, but I'm not entirely certain. I haven't used an AMD card in ages. Big reason why that has to do with the feature set that NVIDIA has for content creators. So for the longest time, they were the only ones that had something like Shadowplay, and Shadowplay is a very good recording program for local recording. In fact, I'm using it for this video. Why is it good? Why is it so good? Well, first off, AMD didn't have an equivalent solution. Their version had a lot of compatibility issues. I mean, they had, but it was for many years, AMD just was doing a really piss poor job with it, as they were in general with GPUs. So that was one of the main things. Now we have NVIDIA Broadcast, the microphone settings, the ability to stream yourself on a webcam, but just hide the background behind you. All those kind of things, like that is a phenomenal change compared to what we had before. It's an enormous change for myself as a content creator. Now, people say, oh, but you can do it through other means. Sure, you can, but it's always annoying, and there's always compatibility issues. With NVIDIA, you know most of the time what they're doing will work, and it will work pretty well because they actually put in effort for it to work. So like with a filter, you can use reshade. With microphone, there's some other programs, but again, it can be janky, it can cause problems, whereas with NVIDIA, right now, things just work. The only downside of their NVIDIA Broadcast, for instance, is that it uses more memory. So I had to upgrade from 16 gigs to 32 gigs. Well, I had to upgrade for other reasons as well, but that's one of the things. Now, with regards to Elden Ring specifically, just before I start showing the footage I recorded earlier as part of my Let's Play, HDR only works if you're in full screen mode. Now, let me just look at the HDR settings. I've set the brightness to 6. I felt 5, which is the default, which is just a bit too dark in dark areas. I mean, things are pretty dark right now. And then you have maximum brightness. I've let that as default. And then a max saturation setting. I think I might actually lower this to about 7. It might have been too much. The default of 5, it was a bit too low. I switched it up to 8. I felt that was decent enough, but you know, you need to see things in the game to see how things are. So the fact that you can't do it in windowed mode, borderless windowed mode, is a problem to begin with, because one, this game is really bad in full screen mode at keeping your mouse on a single screen. I have 2 monitors, one I check chat if I'm streaming or something like that, but the other issue is that if I want to tab out, then that's a genuine frustration to do so when you're in a full screen mode. So it is annoying having to use full screen mode to have HDR. Other games do allow you to have windowed mode or borderless mode while still maintaining HDR. So that's one frustration with it. And in general, when it comes to max settings, Elden Ring just doesn't perform quite as well. Now, is HDR worth it? Absolutely so. Just to give you guys a comparison of how things look with HDR in comparison to it at the top, let me just head over to the edge here. You can see all of that ahead of you. Just gonna go to System, Settings, turn off HDR for a second. I mean, it still looks pretty good. This is a pretty good area. But yeah, there is a pretty substantial difference between HDR on and HDR off. Pretty substantial. So HDR is absolutely worth it. from my perspective. In fact, I was not necessarily convinced about how great HDR was until I was able to actually play some God of War, not necessarily a whole lot, but some God of War on an HDR screen, on a TV specifically. I hooked it up to my computer, I hooked the TV up to my computer, and I was able to play some God of War with it. But that caused issues because TVs might have great image quality. Absolutely, the TV I have probably has at least equivalent quality to the monitor I'm currently using, if not better, actually better in quite a few ways. But the problem is input lag. So moving the mouse, using a mouse in that was an actual pain to do so. And TVs are just not made for desktop usage. They will be burned to the ground, burned in, as it's called, burn in. You'll have burn in potentially on your TV if you use it for desktop usage. So it's not something you can do. It was great having a huge screen, I can tell you that. I would love to have a monitor that's pretty big because I personally have eyesight issues. I would love to have a monitor that large to use for day usage, but I digress. Point is, if you're gonna play games in HDR on a PC specifically, then you will want to use a monitor, a gaming monitor, or a monitor with good HDR support. Now, what's good HDR support? Well, as far as I know, a good HDR support is HDR 600 or above. The problem is, it's really fucking costly. So, if you buy a monitor with cheap HDR, it's not going to look that great and it's going to cause issues. I've seen this firsthand at a friend's place. He has an HDR monitor, an HDR 10 monitor, and it just looks like ass. In fact, it looks so bad for him in watching movies online, for instance, or using in Windows, that he's just basically stopped using it altogether. I mean, HDR can still look great in games, but he does have a number of issues, a significant number of issues because of that. Windows does have HDR issues. It also has something called in Windows 11 Auto HDR, but that's also causing quite a few problems. It works, but it's not real HDR. And on top of that, so it doesn't look as good, obviously, but on top of that, the bigger problem with it is that the clarity filter I'm personally using in this video, if I try and use it, and I tried this in both Warhammer 3 and Lost Ark, if I try and use that clarity filter together with Auto HDR, then the screen's just gonna look really bad. I get some like weird silhouette. And so there's just no compatibility with that yet. I think that technology is still in an early stage, so we need to see how that's going to develop and how things are going to improve. In some ways, HDR is really good for movies right now and photos, and we can get some really good quality stuff in terms of that, but it's not there yet in terms of gaming, I feel like. I think there's still plenty of things to work on it, but Auto HDR or something similar is probably going to lead to a lot of good things in the future, where we will be able to play games not just with HDR, not just games that have HDR on them, but also older games and have HDR in them eventually, 5 or so, maybe less years from now. And that is a phenomenal situation. I mean, think about where video game graphics were a decade ago, 2 decades ago. I mean, I remember as a kid growing up playing Heroes of Might and Magic 3, Warcraft 1, Command and Conquer. Look at where we are right now in terms of video game graphics. It has been a significant journey and a significant quality of life change since then. There's still plenty of issues, performance issues, graphical issues. We're not quite there at 4K gaming, because the problem is, even if you have a computer capable technically of playing games on 4K, one, that's going to be extremely expensive. We're talking here thousands of dollars. Two, no computer in this world right now can achieve, let's say, 100 FPS or more in 4K. None whatsoever. It doesn't matter if you have a 3090 Ti, it's irrelevant. Maybe in 2-3 generations of GPUs we would get that, but then we will also still have the curse of poorly optimized games. Elden Ring is actually a very poorly optimized game because they did a really piss poor job with RTX 12. This game should run better than it is. Dark Souls 3 ran much better than this when it came out, and it's also locked at 60 FPS, which is not a great experience. I can tell you, once you experience over 100, 120, 140 FPS gaming, I can tell you don't want to go back. Playing at 60 FPS is a pretty jarring experience. Sure, you have a mod available for Elden Ring to play offline with a higher FPS, but I've had problems getting that to work. And two, the persistent online world, in a sense, or the online world that this game has, is actually a part of Dark Souls. Even if, in my case, it's just seeing ghosts, bloodstains, and messages. I haven't really participated in any summoning activities or invasions, but I do see the messages, and I do think that they add quite a lot to you exploring the world. I've played Dark Souls before, Dark Souls 2 specifically, offline, or Dark Souls 1 offline, just to not deal with invasions, for instance. And I can tell you, it really isn't the same thing. Like, the messages do add a lot to it, to flavor to that, because you know, oh, people have been here, people are here. You see a silhouette of someone's ghost, you know they're in the same location as you are. So playing offline is not really a working solution. Now, the question with HDR, is it worth it? I mean, the image looks great, right? The quality of the video looks great, but there are some issues with it. Implementation obviously is an issue. Auto HDR has got a lot of work to do, and then the problem is the monitor itself. So if you buy an HDR monitor, you can get a really good one. That if you buy a non-HDR monitor, you can get a really good one compared to an HDR one. If you buy a cheap HDR monitor, it's not going to be worth it. It's going to look like crap. So a good HDR monitor, like the one I'm playing right now, I don't know how long I'll be able to keep that up, but the one I'm currently using for a moment is something an Acer Predator 32. Really good monitor, pretty expensive, impressed the hell out of me, like overall quality. It costs twice as much to get this monitor than the one I regularly use. And the one I regularly use was like, and I bought it 2 years ago. It's an AOC monitor, really good quality in its own right, outside of the not having HDR, and I paid half the price of how much this Predator monitor is worth. And the Predator monitor, I got it at the discount, and there are some that are significantly more expensive. There are some that are 50% more than that, double the price, triple the price if you want really good HDR quality. So you are paying a lot. Now, obviously, when you're buying a monitor with that quality, you're generally going to get other things as well. Higher refresh rate, higher image quality in general. Though not necessarily, you are going to get overall better quality. But if you're gaming in a non-HDR environment, what do you want? You want good image quality, you want a low response time, or a very fast response time, that is, and you want a decent refresh rate and resolution. Right now, given the current state of PC hardware, I'd say something up to 100 FPS support on the monitor, maybe G-Sync, though personally, this monitor that I'm currently using, this Predator I'm trying out basically, it has G-Sync. I turned it off because I was getting some weird tearing. Like, it's odd, it's bizarre, because I was getting tearing on my screen, but it wasn't in-game tearing, it wasn't the game itself. What was happening is there is a compatibility conflict between the monitor's G-Sync, or G-Sync, and NVIDIA's clarity filter. Worth saying, those are both NVIDIA technologies, so they're conflicting with one another. Now, this is the Acer Predator 32 is G-Sync compatible. It's not G-Sync Ultimate or that. It's just G-Sync compatible. So it supports G-Sync, but it's not the best in that respect. G-Sync, I don't think, is necessarily worth it, to be honest. I didn't necessarily notice a huge difference or a huge quality of life change using G-Sync. Especially in day and age, like, G-Sync might have been worth it before, but nowadays we have fast sync, courtesy of NVIDIA, and fast sync is worth it, absolutely so. But G-Sync, not really as much from my perspective, because you do want to try and have a decent enough frame rate. You don't want to get very low frame rate issues. And I guess G-Sync is supposed to make things smoother so you don't have that jarring low frame rate experience, except it doesn't quite work even with that on, at least in a game like Elden Ring, where you have a huge amount of stuttering and a huge FPS drops. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the reason G-Sync is struggling here is because this game is struggling in general with performance issues, and it's not because of the technical graphics, it's because they did a really piss poor job using DirectX 12 and the way they implemented DirectX 12 in this specific game. They really should have gone with DirectX 11. That would have done it much better. In fact, many DirectX 12 run much poorly. From my personal experience, I've tried DirectX 12 in pretty much every game that I've played that supported it, and virtually every single time that I tried it on my computer, which is pretty solid, every single time I've tried it, I found that my FPS and my overall performance was worse than in DirectX 11. I don't care if it's Battlefield, Crisis, Call of Duty, or anything like that. Every time I've tried DirectX 12 versus 11, it has ended up going poorly. And Elden Ring is a DirectX 12 only game. It might actually be the only DirectX 12, or the only major release that's DirectX 12 only on PC. That's, I can't really think of another title that is DirectX 12 only. Maybe Battlefield, the most recent Battlefield game, but not entirely certain, actually. Now that I think about it, I mean, we've already forgotten the latest Battlefield game. I'm just thinking about Battlefield 1, for instance, or Battlefield 4, or Battlefield World War II, however, Battlefield 5, right? But that game was also forgotten and dropped it. Things are not great in Battlefield series right now. But anyway, point is HDR worth it? Well, you're going to get a lot of image quality, but you might be paying twice the price, and a lot of games won't support it. Only some games will support it. Where you can get HDR working, it looks amazing. Where you don't, you're basically wasting your money in some ways. Though good HDR monitors, not HDR10, but HDR 600 monitors will generally have really good image quality compared to other monitors, but you need to pay for that. If you're just trying to get it cheap, it's not going to be worth it. If you're willing to spend the money, it probably will. But finally, here's another issue with HDR video. How do you record and upload an HDR video? If you're an NVIDIA user, I'm not sure what the situation is with AMD, but if you're an NVIDIA GPU user, you do have one good option. You can record footage using Shadowplay, or the former Shadowplay, Share, whatever it's called these days. Basically, GeForce Experience. You use GeForce Experience, you record the footage, and it is HDR footage. Worth saying that YouTube is going to take some time to process it, longer than it will your regular video, but the footage itself is HDR footage and it will look exactly the same, even regardless of how much time it's going to take the processing. Even the initial processing is still going to look pretty much the exact same, but then you are going to get the true HDR video once YouTube finishes that. So YouTube supports it, NVIDIA Shadowplay supports it. Not much else from my experience. I've tried Mirrorless Action, which supposedly has HDR support, but it didn't work. It didn't work to what I wanted. There was a clear difference between the footage I was getting for Shadowplay and the footage I was getting from Mirrorless Action. Maybe I hadn't configured it better, but that's a paid program. Not fond of it. Okay, what about Open Broadcaster software? Does that work? Nope. OBS doesn't have HDR support. And OBS is the centerpiece of recording and streaming software for an enormous amount of people. The best you can do if you're using OBS is you put a tone map that is going to allow you to play HDR and record that footage without it looking terribly. If you just try and record HDR footage with a program that doesn't support that, it's just going to look terrible. But there is a tone map available. It does cost some money, $5 to actually get that tone map. Annoying, I know, but that's your option if you're interested in doing so. And even then, you're just faking it. It's not an HDR video or an HDR stream. You're just pretending you're streaming HDR. You can get some pretty decent quality, but it's just not something on the same, anywhere near the same level of what you're actually seeing on screen. The only thing I've seen so far, and I could be wrong on this, that allows you to actually record or stream proper HDR is NVIDIA Shadowplay. The problem is, Shadowplay is great for local recordings. It's probably one of the best local recording programs. You press a button and record, you see if you're recording, if your microphone is on, etc. That's all well and good. But even then, it does have some limits with scenes transitions and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to streaming, I would not use NVIDIA Shadowplay. I have in the past, and I regret it. OBS is what you want to use for streaming, but it doesn't have that support. So if you're looking to stream HDR, forget about it. Even if you could manage it with some program, it's going to be a lot of hassle. Like, the reason people use OBS isn't because it's because it's the only recording or stream program. It's because it's really easy to use and it's really easy to set up. I put it on a second screen. I see what I'm streaming. I see how long I've been streaming for or recording for. I have audio bars, I have scenes, I have scene transitions. I have a lot of options with OBS that other programs, yeah, they might have those, but they don't have the UI. The UI of OBS is very simple, very good, and works very, very well, unlike something like Mirrorless Action. I tried that, wasn't fond of it at all. So that's that's my experience. So there are caveats, major caveats. I think we're still some years away from actually having HDR and be implemented in a proper fashion and to be able to stream and record HDR easily. I mean, once OBS adds HDR support, it's going to be a lot easier, but that's going to be some time away because the guy who's actually working on Open Broadcaster software, he said it's not a big priority. And it kind of makes sense, right? Only so many games have HDR support. Streaming HDR can be difficult. I mean, a lot of people do stream on low quality because of the limits imposed on Twitch. Not the limits imposed on YouTube. This is one reason I don't stream on Twitch anymore, because Twitch has limits of bitrate. YouTube does not. I have the internet to support that. And so so the choice I have, either I don't stream on Twitch or I stream at a lower bitrate, which means the streams themselves look worse off than if I just bothered on YouTube. But yeah, that's kind of how things are right now with HDR. I think it's worth it especially for personal use. Like if you don't give a crap about recording or streaming or anything like that, it is absolutely worth it. It is a major quality of life change that will make things look phenomenal in comparison to non-HDR gaming. But there are, of course, limits, and it's not necessarily great. Or if you want to use auto HDR, there are going to be caveats with that. So not quite there yet, still a developing technology, but same thing with ray tracing, same thing with DLSS or similar technologies. We're still working on them, we're still developing them, and they are improving by the year. And that's just exactly what's going to happen with HDR, I feel. Is it worth buying an HDR monitor right now? You might ask. Well, that's a tricky one, right? Is it worth it right now? Because you won't get the HDR 1000 monitors right now, except unless you're willing to spend, thousands of dollars potentially, or $2,000+. I'd say for an HDR 600, likely, yeah, if you can afford something like this or the Samsung Odyssey 7 or something like that, G7. Because I actually put some real effort into figuring out what was worth it and what was not. There's only a handful of monitors that are really worth it, that are of a reasonable price, and that's always a calculation. What's the budget? How much money? Like if you have a fortune, if you have let's say if you have $10,000, sure, you can build a supercomputer. Maybe not quite even then, but you could afford everything you wanted to. But there's always trade-offs when you don't have that kind of budget between computer hardware, your desk, your mouse, keyboard, etc. There's always trade-offs people make. I feel right now anything more than HDR 600 is too significant a trade-off, but 2 years from now we might get something much better than that. We might have much cheaper monitors with good quality HDR and good quality picture in general available for us. So would it be worth it right now? Depends on how much money you have. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.